I am other than name, form, and action. My nature is ever free. I am self, the supreme unconditioned Brahman. I am pure awareness, always non-dual. Adi Shankara, Upadasasa Hasri.
One who sees all beings in the self alone and the self of all beings feels no hatred by virtue of that understanding. For the seer of oneness, who knows all beings to be the self, where is delusion and sorrow? Isha Upanishad. As a young boy, Shankara, born in a Brahmin family, showed extraordinary intelligence and spiritual inclination. He expressed a strong desire to become a monk, sannyasi, and dedicate his life to the pursuit of spiritual knowledge. However, his mother was deeply attached to him and hesitant to let him leave. One day, while Shankara was bathing in a river, a crocodile caught his leg and began dragging him underwater. Realizing the imminent danger, Shankara called out to his mother and asked for her permission to take sannyasa, as it was believed that embracing renunciation would free him from the cycle of life and death. In her panic and love for her son, his mother agreed. As soon as she gave her consent, the crocodile let go of Shankara and he emerged unharmed. Interpreting this as a divine sign, Shankara kept his promise, took sannyasa, and left home to travel and spread the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. The crocodile in the story is often seen as a metaphor for the attachments and struggles of life, and Shankara's escape signifies liberation through renunciation and divine grace. Advaita Vedanta is a non-dualistic school of Hindu philosophy that teaches that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is formless, infinite, and the only truth, while the individual self, Atman, is not separate from Brahman but identical to it. It was systematized by the 8th century philosopher Adi Shankaracharya. Core principles. Non-duality, Advaita. There is no separation between the individual self, Atman, and the universal consciousness, Brahman. All perceived dualities and distinctions are illusions, Maya. Maya, illusion. The world as we perceive it is an illusion, created by ignorance, avidya. Maya causes individuals to see themselves as separate from Brahman. Liberation, moksha. Liberation is attained when one realizes their true self as Brahman. This realization dissolves ignorance and leads to freedom from the cycle of birth and death, samsara. Knowledge, jnana. The path to liberation is primarily through self-inquiry and knowledge of the self, as emphasized in texts like the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. Famous Advaitic statement. Tat Tvam Asi. You are that. From the Chandogya Upanishad, symbolizing the unity of the Atman and Brahman. This Indian philosophy teaches that the ultimate goal of life is self-realization, recognizing that the individual self is not separate from the universal, infinite reality. Adi Shankaracharya, 8th century CE, was one of India's greatest philosophers and theologians, known for consolidating the doctrine of Advaita Vedanta and revitalizing Hinduism at a time when it was facing decline due to internal divisions and external influences. Here's an outline of his life story. Early life. Birthplace: Kaladi, a village in present-day Kerala, India. Parents: Shivaguru, father, and Aryamba, mother, devout Brahmins who prayed for a child. Birth: Shankara was born under divine blessings. Legend says Lord Shiva granted their wish, and Shankara was seen as an incarnation of Shiva. Spiritual inclination: from a young age, Shankara displayed exceptional intelligence and a strong inclination toward spirituality. He mastered the Vedas by the age of 8. Renunciation. Mother's consent. Shankara's desire to renounce worldly life was initially opposed by his mother. However, the famous crocodile story changed her mind, and she allowed him to take sannyasa, renunciation. Guru. Shankara traveled to the banks of the Narmada River, where he became a disciple of Govindapada, a great Vedantic master. Under his guidance, Shankara mastered Advaita Vedanta. Spiritual mission. Traveling across India, Shankara traveled extensively, debating scholars, spreading Advaita Vedanta, and unifying Hinduism. He emphasized the authority of the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. Debates. He defeated numerous scholars in philosophical debates, including the famous debate with Mandana Mishra, a proponent of ritualistic traditions. Mandana and his wife, Ubhaya Bharati, later became Shankara's disciples. Reviving Hinduism. Shankara reformed temple practices, unified diverse sects, and revived core Hindu philosophies to counter Buddhism and Jainism's growing influence. Establishment of Mathas. Shankara established 4 major Mathas monasteries to preserve and propagate Vedantic knowledge. Sringeri, South India. Dwarka, West India. Puri, East India. Badrinatha Jyotirmath, North India. These mathas became centers of learning and spiritual guidance. Major works. Shankara wrote commentaries, bhashyas on key scriptures, including Brahma Sutras, systematic explanation of Advaita philosophy; Upanishads, commentaries on key philosophical texts; Bhagavad Gita, explaining the non-dual nature of reality. He also composed devotional hymns like Bhaja Govindam and Sundarya Lahari, blending Advaita with devotion. Shankara passed away at the young age of 32, with some accounts suggesting he attained Mahasamadhi at Kedarnath, while others claim he merged into Brahman at Kanchipuram. Despite his brief life, his influence on Indian philosophy and Hinduism remains profound. Adi Shankaracharya is regarded as a spiritual giant who clarified the essence of Vedantic philosophy, revived Hindu thought, and unified various sects. His teachings continue to inspire seekers worldwide. The main philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is non-dualism, Advaita, which asserts the fundamental oneness of all existence. It teaches that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is the only truth, and the perceived world of duality is an illusion, Maya. Here's a concise breakdown. Core principles of Advaita Vedanta. Brahman is the ultimate reality. Brahman is formless, infinite, changeless, and the source of everything. It is pure consciousness and bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. Atman is Brahman. The individual self, Atman, is not different from Brahman. They are identical. Realizing this oneness is the key to liberation. Moksha. Maya, illusion. The world as perceived through the senses is an illusion caused by ignorance, avidya. Dualities like pleasure-pain, good-evil, and subject-object are temporary and unreal. Liberation through knowledge, jnana. Ignorance of our true nature keeps us trapped in the cycle of birth and death, samsara. Self-realization, achieved through inquiry, meditation, and knowledge of the Upanishads, dissolves ignorance. No duality. There is no real distinction between the creator and the creation, or between the self and the universe. All is one. Key Advaitic statements. Mahavakyas. Tattvam Asi. You are that. Chandogya Upanishad. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this is Brahman. Chandogya Upanishad. Prajnanam Brahma. Consciousness is Brahman. Aitareya Upanishad. Advaita Vedanta sees life as a journey to recognize our true identity as Brahman, transcending the illusions of separateness and duality. Liberation is achieved by realizing that we are not the body, mind, or ego, but the infinite, unchanging consciousness. In Advaita Vedanta, moksha, liberation, is the realization of your true self, Atman, as identical to the ultimate reality, Brahman. It frees one from the cycle of birth and death, samsara, and dissolves all ignorance, avidya, and suffering. Attaining moksha involves a combination of knowledge, self-discipline, and spiritual practice. Here's the path outlined in Advaita Vedanta. 1. Jnana Yoga, Path of Knowledge. The central path in Advaita Vedanta, emphasizing self-realization through wisdom and inquiry. Practices include self-inquiry, Atma Vichara, asking, "Who am I?" to realize your true nature. Shravana, listening to teachings of Vedantic texts like the Upanishads. Manana, reflecting deeply to internalize these truths. Nididhyasana, meditating to experience oneness with Brahman directly. 2. Renunciation, Vairagya, letting go of attachment to material possessions, desires, and ego. Realizing that the world is maya, illusion, and transient, focusing instead on the eternal truth. 3. Control of mind and senses. Sadhana Chatushtaya, fourfold qualifications. Viveka, discrimination between the real, Brahman, and the unreal, world. Vairagya, detachment from worldly pleasures. Shatsampat, cultivating 6 virtues: control of mind, senses, inner calm, forbearance, faith, and concentration. Mumukshutva, intense longing for liberation. 4. Meditation, dhyana. Practicing meditation to quiet the mind and transcend the ego. Focus on the formless Brahman or repeat Vedantic truths like Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. 5. Bhakti and karma, supporting practices. While Jnana Yoga is primary, Bhakti, devotion to God, and Karma Yoga, selfless action, can purify the mind and prepare it for knowledge. Bhakti helps dissolve ego, and Karma Yoga helps reduce attachment. 6. Grace of a Guru and Scriptures. A realized teacher, Guru, can guide you through the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Studying texts like the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras is essential for understanding. Final goal. When you realize that your Atman is Brahman, the illusion of separateness dissolves. Moksha is not something to be achieved, but the recognition of what you already are, pure, infinite consciousness. The characteristics of Brahman or consciousness, as described in Advaita Vedanta, are eternal, infinite, and transcendent. Below are the core attributes. Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness bliss. Sat, existence. Brahman is eternal, unchanging existence. It is the underlying reality of everything that exists. Chit, consciousness. Brahman is pure awareness, self-luminous, and the source of all knowledge. Ananda, bliss. Brahman is infinite bliss, beyond suffering, joy, or pain. Nirguna, without attributes. Brahman is formless, attributeless, and beyond all qualities. Guna. It cannot be described or limited by any characteristics of the material world. Advaya, non-dual. Brahman is the only reality, and all perceived dualities, e.g., self and world, subject and object, are illusions arising from ignorance, maya. Infinite, ananta. Brahman has no beginning, end, or boundaries. It is limitless in time, space, and nature. Changeless, nitya. Brahman is immutable, unaffected by creation, destruction, or any processes within the universe. It transcends time and causality. Satyam, ultimate truth. Brahman is the absolute truth, in contrast to the relative and temporary reality of the world. Self-luminous, Svayam Prakasha. Brahman is self-revealing and does not depend on anything else for its existence or illumination. It is the light that makes all experiences possible. Beyond perception and thought. Brahman cannot be fully grasped by the senses or the mind. It is beyond words and concepts, but can be realized through direct experience. In summary, Brahman is the infinite, eternal, unchanging reality, the essence of existence, awareness, and bliss, beyond all dualities and limitations. Gaudapadacharya was a revered Indian philosopher and scholar, most known for his role in Advaita Vedanta, an influential school of thought in Hindu philosophy. He is often considered one of the earliest proponents of this non-dualistic philosophy, which emphasizes that the ultimate reality is a singular, unchanging, and formless consciousness, transcending the physical world and the illusion of duality. Here are key points about his life and work. Historical context. Gaudapadacharya is believed to have lived around the 7th or 8th century CE. He was born in the region of Gauda, modern-day Bengal, and his name reflects this geographical origin. Some scholars place him earlier, in the 6th century. Teacher of Shankaracharya's grand teacher, Gaudapadacharya was the teacher of the great philosopher and theologian Adi Shankara's grandfather, often identified as Govinda. Through this line, Gaudapadacharya became a key figure in shaping the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. The Mandukya Karika. His most important work is the Mandukya Karika, a commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. This text is pivotal in Advaita Vedanta, presenting a systematic analysis of the nature of reality using the syllable aum as a framework. It outlines the non-dualistic nature of ultimate reality, explaining that the apparent differences in the world, such as the distinction between subject and object, are illusory, and only Brahman, the ultimate reality, is real. Non-dualism, Advaita. Gaudapadacharya's philosophy challenges the conventional dualistic views of reality. His teachings argue that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is the sole existence, and all perceived differences in the universe, like the distinction between individual self and the world, are due to Maya, or illusion. This radical view later became the foundation for Adi Shankara's teachings. The 3 states of consciousness. In his Mandukya Karika, Gaudapadacharya describes 3 states of consciousness: Jagrat, waking state; Svapna, dream state; Sushupti, deep sleep state. He also introduces the concept of a 4th state, Turiya, which transcends the first 3 and represents the ultimate state of pure consciousness, synonymous with Brahman. Philosophical contributions. Gaudapadacharya emphasized viveka, discrimination, and vairagya, renunciation, as necessary for realizing the non-dual nature of reality. He developed intricate arguments on how the perception of duality is a result of ignorance and how liberation, moksha, is attained by the removal of this ignorance through self-realization. Influence on later thinkers. His ideas deeply influenced later philosophers, especially Shankara, who elaborated on and spread Advaita Vedanta across India. Gaudapadacharya's teachings also shaped the Vedantic tradition's discussion on the nature of the self, the universe, and their ultimate unity. In summary, Gaudapadacharya's work laid the foundation for Advaita Vedanta's core teachings on the unity of reality and the illusory nature of dualistic perceptions. His writings continue to influence both Hindu philosophy and global discussions of non-duality and metaphysics. The philosophy of Sat Chit Ananda is central to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta and describes the essential nature of Brahman, the ultimate reality. The term is a Sanskrit expression composed of 3 components. Sat, being or existence. This refers to the absolute existence, the unchanging eternal reality. Sat signifies that which is, without beginning or end. It is the ground of all being, beyond time, space, and change. Sit, consciousness or awareness. Sit represents pure consciousness or pure awareness. It is the inherent, unbounded awareness that pervades all existence. It is not limited by individual minds or bodies, but is the universal consciousness that remains constant, unaffected by the physical world. Ananda, bliss or joy. Ananda refers to the inherent bliss or blissful nature of Brahman. It is the state of perfect peace, fullness, and happiness, beyond the pleasures and sufferings of the material world. This bliss is not emotional or transient, but a profound, unshakable joy that arises from realizing the unity of existence. Core idea. The phrase Sat Chit Ananda encapsulates the essence of Brahman, affirming that the ultimate reality is not just an abstract principle, but is characterized by these three inseparable qualities. Sat, existence. Brahman is the sole, eternal reality behind all forms and phenomena. Sight, consciousness. Brahman is pure awareness, the consciousness that underlies everything. Ananda, bliss. Brahman is an embodiment of bliss, a state of eternal joy that transcends worldly experiences. Interpretation in Advaita Vedanta. In Advaita Vedanta, Sat Chit Ananda is used to describe the nature of Brahman as non-dual, Advaita. The world, with all its multiplicity, is seen as a manifestation of Brahman, and everything is ultimately an expression of these three qualities. In this view, human beings, too, are reflections of this ultimate reality. When an individual realizes their true self, Atman, as non-different from Brahman, they experience the unity of Sat Chit Ananda, which brings liberation, moksha, from the cycle of birth and death, samsara. Sat Chit Ananda describes the infinite, all-pervasive nature of the ultimate reality, where existence, consciousness, and bliss are inseparable aspects of the one truth, Brahman. Parinamavada and Vivartavada, causality and change in Vedanta. In Vedanta, causality and the nature of change are crucial topics. The primary distinction lies in the understanding of how the empirical world originates from Brahman, the ultimate reality. Vedantic schools generally acknowledge two types of causes. Nimitta karana, the efficient cause, that which causes the existence of the universe, and upadana karana, the material cause, that from which the material of the universe emerges. All Vedantic schools accept that Brahman is both the material and efficient cause of the world, in line with the theory of Satkaryavada, which posits that the effect is pre-existent in the cause. Parinamavada and Vivartavada. The question of how the world originates from Brahman is addressed in different ways by various Vedantic commentators. The two central perspectives on this are Parinamavada and Vivartavada. Parinamavada, the doctrine of transformation, holds that the world is a real transformation, parinama, of Brahman. According to this view, Brahman undergoes a genuine change to produce the material world. The transformation is seen as a real and substantial modification of Brahman's essence, which gives rise to the apparent universe. Vivartavada, the doctrine of manifestation, asserts that the world is merely an unreal appearance, Vivarta, of Brahman. Here Brahman seems to undergo a transformation, but in truth, no actual change occurs. The diversity and multiplicity of the world are illusions or appearances, with Brahman remaining unaltered. In this view, the world is seen as illusory, and the only true reality is Brahman, which is unborn, unchanging, and indivisible. Vedantic views on causality. While all Vedantic schools agree that Brahman is the ultimate cause of the universe, they diverge on how Brahman causes the world. Parinamavada, supported by classical Vedantic texts such as the Brahma Sutras, posits that the world originates from Brahman as a real transformation. This position is central to most Vedantic subschools, including the Sankhya tradition. Vivartavada, primarily associated with the Advaitins, followers of Shankara, argues that the world is only conventionally real. For Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate reality of Brahman transcends all apparent transformations, and the multiplicity of the universe is illusory. Shankara, in particular, argued that Brahman is the only true reality and that the empirical world is an appearance, albeit one that appears real in everyday experience. Adi Shankara and causality. Although Shankara is often associated with Vivartavada, a closer look at his works reveals that he explained causality in a manner more akin to Parinamavada. Shankara taught that Brahman constitutes the essence, svabhava, of the universe, and the universe cannot be thought of as distinct from it. Thus, the world exists only insofar as it depends entirely on Brahman. In his view, the world's reality is tied to Brahman, and although it appears to change, this change is ultimately an illusion rooted in ignorance, avidya. Shankara did introduce the concept of unevolved name and form, primal matter, which corresponds to prakriti in other traditions, from which the world evolves. However, this idea was later abandoned by his followers, and Vivartavada became the dominant explanation within Advaita Vedanta. This view maintains the primacy of Atman Brahman, while acknowledging the world as an illusory manifestation. The role of Prakasatman and the Vivarana school. The more explicit definition of Vivartavada as an illusory transformation of Brahman was introduced by the 13th century scholar Prakasatman, who founded the Vivarana school. His teachings define the world as an illusion, a position that some later scholars mistakenly attributed to Shankara. In fact, Shankara's explanations are more aligned with Parinamavada than with Vivartavada, with the latter theory emerging later in the Advaita subschool. Parinamavada and Vivartavada offer differing views on the nature of causality and change in Vedantic philosophy. While Parinamavada asserts that the world is a real transformation of Brahman, Vivartavada claims that the world is an illusory manifestation. Shankara's philosophy, though often linked to Vivartavada, actually leans more toward Parinamavada, suggesting a real but dependent connection between Brahman and the world, with the world's apparent reality being rooted in ignorance. The distinction between these views highlights the deep metaphysical inquiries in Vedanta regarding the relationship between the ultimate reality and the manifest world. I am other than name, form, and action. My nature is ever free. I am self, the supreme unconditioned Brahman. I am pure awareness, always non-dual. Adi Shankara, Upadesasahasri. This quote from Adi Shankara's Upadesasahasri beautifully encapsulates the essence of his Advaita Vedanta philosophy, emphasizing the non-dual nature of the self and its distinction from the physical world. Here's a breakdown of its key concepts. I am other than name, form, and action. This refers to the fact that the true self, Atman, is beyond the superficial aspects of the world, name, form, and action. These are all external, perceptible attributes that are tied to the empirical world and its transient nature. The self, however, transcends all such distinctions. My nature is ever free. The self is not bound by any limitations or conditions. It is free from time, space, and all forms of bondage, representing ultimate freedom. The self is beyond the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. I am self, the supreme unconditioned Brahman. The self, Atman, is the same as Brahman, the ultimate reality. Brahman is unconditioned, meaning it is not subject to any external limitations or changes. It is the singular, infinite essence that underlies all existence. I am pure awareness, always non-dual. The true self is pure consciousness, or chit, and it is non-dual, advitya. There is no separation between the observer and the observed, the subject and the object. The experience of duality is a product of ignorance, avidya, and true realization reveals the oneness of the self with Brahman. This passage expresses the profound realization that, at the deepest level, we are not separate from the divine or the ultimate reality. Our true nature is free, pure consciousness, beyond the limitations of form, name, and action. It invites the reader to contemplate and realize their inherent unity with Brahman. Attaining Vidya, knowledge, in Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta views the liberated state, where the self is identified as Atman Brahman, as the true nature of every individual. According to Shankara and the Vivarana school, this state is inherent within all humans and cannot be created through human effort. It is already our essential nature. As Swami Vivekananda eloquently put it, "The Vedas cannot show you Brahman. You are that already. They can only help to take away the veil that hides truth from our eyes. The cessation of ignorance can only come when I know that God and I are one." In other words, identify yourself with Atman, not with human limitations. The idea that we are bound is only an illusion, Maya. Freedom is inseparable from the nature of the Atman. This is ever pure, ever perfect, ever unchangeable. While the Advaita tradition holds that the true nature of Brahman is inherent within each individual, it also emphasizes human effort through the path of Jnana Yoga, a disciplined progression of study and introspection, leading to the realization of this truth and the ultimate attainment of moksha, liberation. Critics of Neo-Advaita, which emphasizes direct insight, argue that traditional Advaita goes beyond mere self-inquiry and requires ethical discipline, textual study, and self-restraint. This can be found in works like Shankara's Upadesasahasri and the Viveka Chudamani. Sources of knowledge. Vidya. The Advaita tradition teaches that correct knowledge of Atman and Brahman is attained through a combination of study, reasoning, and meditation. The main sources of this knowledge are Sruti, scripture, the Vedic texts and Upanishads, which convey the nature of ultimate reality. Proper reasoning, the ability to intellectually understand the nature of existence and the non-duality of Atman and Brahman. Meditation, direct introspection and contemplation on the nature of the self and its unity with Brahman. The methodology for attaining knowledge is outlined in the 3 stages of practice. Sravana, hearing, listening to teachings and discussions on the Vedas and Vedantic texts. The student engages in dialogue with a teacher and fellow students and studies key texts like the Brahma Sutras. Manana, thinking, reflecting deeply on the teachings and contemplating their implications. This involves personal inquiry, where the student meditates on the lessons learned during the Shravana stage. Nididhyasana, meditation, the final stage, where the student meditates on the truths discovered, fully internalizing them and realizing their identity with Brahman. This stage leads to the fusion of knowledge and being, culminating in a deep experiential realization of non-duality. Preparation, the 4-fold qualities. Before beginning the formal practice, a student must develop certain qualities that make them fit for the path of knowledge. These are known as the sadhana katustaya 4-fold qualities, which are viveka, discrimination, the ability to distinguish between the eternal, nitya, and the transient, anitya, recognizing that only Brahman is real and everything else is illusory. Vairagya, renunciation, the detachment from worldly pleasures, both in this life and in any possible afterlife. The student renounces any attachment that distracts from the pursuit of truth. Shamadhi Sattva Sampati, 6-fold virtues. Shama, mental tranquility and the ability to focus the mind. Dhamma, self-restraint, especially with regard to the senses. Uparati, dispassion, or freedom from desire for worldly pleasures. Titiksa, endurance, the ability to bear life's challenges with patience. Shraddha, faith in the teachings and the Guru. Samadhana, Contentment and focus on the goal of liberation. Mumuksutva, desire for liberation. An intense yearning for freedom from ignorance, liberation from the cycle of birth and death, and ultimate wisdom. The threefold practice: Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. These three practices form the core methodology in Advaita Vedanta for attaining knowledge and realizing the oneness of Atman and Brahman. Sravana, hearing. Listening to teachings from the Upanishads and other sacred texts, and engaging in dialogues with the teacher. Manana, thinking. Reflecting deeply on these teachings, contemplating their significance, and integrating them into one's understanding of the self. Nididhyasana, meditation. This stage involves deep meditation and internalization of the teachings. The goal is not just intellectual understanding, but direct, experiential realization of non-duality. While the threefold practice is essential for most Advaita followers, Shankara's works show some ambivalence towards its rigid application. He argued that moksha could be attained immediately when one truly understands the Mahavakya, great sayings, such as Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art, articulating the identity of Atman and Brahman. In contrast, figures like Mandana Misra explicitly endorse the threefold path, emphasizing meditation as a crucial aspect of attaining self-realization. Some scholars, such as Bilamoria, argue that this methodology blends concepts from both yoga and karma, action, thus integrating ancient practices into a cohesive path toward liberation. Neti neti is a Sanskrit phrase meaning not this, not this. It is a method of self-inquiry in the Advaita Vedanta tradition used to negate or eliminate all concepts, identities, and attributes that are not the ultimate reality. The idea behind neti neti is to help one realize the true nature of the self, Atman, by rejecting anything that is transient or not essential to it. The process involves the following. First, negation. Rejection of the physical body, emotions, thoughts, and anything external to the self, recognizing that they are not the true essence. Second, negation. Rejection of all conceptual identities, such as one's name, role, or social identity, recognizing that these two are illusory and not the true self. Final realization. What remains after these negations is the realization of one's true, formless, and eternal nature, Atman or Brahman, the essence of pure consciousness and non-duality. The technique encourages the seeker to continuously ask, "Am I this? Am I that?" and then discard all answers until only the awareness of one's true nature remains. Tat Tvam Asi is a Sanskrit phrase meaning, that thou art, or you are that. It is one of the key Mahavakyas, great sayings, in the Vedanta philosophy, particularly in Advaita Vedanta. This phrase encapsulates the core teaching of non-duality, Advaita, affirming the essential identity of the individual self, Atman, with the ultimate reality, Brahman. Meaning and context. Tat means that, referring to Brahman, the ultimate, infinite, and unchanging reality that pervades the universe. Tvam means you, referring to the individual soul or self, Atman. Asi means are, implying that you, the individual, are the same as that, Brahman. The phrase conveys the profound realization that the individual soul, Atman, and the universal divine essence, Brahman, are not separate, but are ultimately one and the same. It emphasizes that the apparent distinction between the self and the universe is illusory, and that true liberation, moksha, is achieved by recognizing one's unity with Brahman. The challenge to Advaita Vedanta. The rise of Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita posed significant challenges to the ideas of Advaita Vedanta, particularly its monistic view that all distinctions are ultimately illusory and that Brahman is the only reality. These schools of thought rejected the idea that the world is merely Maya, illusion, and that the individual soul can merge with Brahman in a state of non-duality. Vishishtadvaita versus Advaita. Vishishtadvaita retained the emphasis on Brahman as the ultimate reality. But instead of non-duality, it argued for a qualified non-duality where Brahman remains supreme but also manifests as the world, with individual souls as his attributes. This allowed for a relationship of devotion, as opposed to Advaita's impersonal, formless Brahman. Dvaita versus Advaita. Dvaita's theistic dualism outright rejected Advaita's ideas of identity between Brahman and the self. For Madhvacharya, the soul is distinct and never loses its individuality, and liberation comes from God's grace, not through the realization of oneness with Brahman. Conclusion.
The advent of Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita significantly shaped the trajectory of Vedanta and the religious landscape of India. These philosophies grounded their theistic beliefs in Vedanta's core teachings, but took distinct approaches to the nature of God, the soul, and the universe. They offered alternatives to Advaita Vedanta, which, while emphasizing the non-dual nature of reality, was criticized by these schools for denying the reality of the personal God and the world's existence. The interplay between these schools of thought has continued to shape the debates within Indian philosophy and religion, especially in terms of the relationship between the self, God, and the cosmos.